Okay, in this video what we're going to do is look at daylight and sunlight systems in 3ds Max, how to create them, and we're going to have a look at some of the parameters to change and alter the way that they light up our scene. So let's hit Control O to open up a scene here. The scene we want to look for is called lighting systems _ start. So go ahead and open that scene up. And it's a pretty simple scene. If I do a Shift Q to do a quick render here, pretty simple scene that we have. It's just a bunch of cubes that represent buildings or some kind of structures, and then a ground plane here. And we're lighting up this scene using only the default lighting in 3D Max. We don't have any lights set up, so let's go ahead and change that. So up here in the Create panel, instead of geometry and instead of lights, we're going to go all the way to the far end where it says Systems. Click on this little icon here for systems, and you'll only be able to select standard objects. That's okay. And the two objects we're interested in here are sunlights and daylights. Now I just clicked on daylights and the dialog came up. Let me go ahead and edit that out of the video. Yeah. Okay, edit that out of the video. Start again in 3, 2, 1. Now the two items we're interested in here are sunlight and daylight. Let's start off with sunlight here. So let's click on sunlight to create a sunlight. And let's just go ahead and click here and drag to create this compass. And then we'll just drag again to create the actual sunlight. And then we'll click again, and there we go. We have this huge sunlight object that encompasses our entire scene. So let's do a render here. And once we do that, this is what we get. We get a sunlight shining down on our scene. The default lighting's gone, and we have some shadows being cast by this light. Let's close that. Let's go to the Modify panel here, and now we can change and alter some of these settings. Now, a lot of these settings are the same as a directional light in 3D Max. That's because this sunlight is exactly that. It's a directional light in 3D Max. So let's go to the intensity color here, and we can change the multiplier to make this light brighter. So if I want it to be maybe 1.5 times brighter than before, I can do that so it looks much brighter. I can also change the color of the light, so I can make it a sunnier hue. Maybe give it a little bit of a yellow warm color. There you go. And we can also change a few different things here. Let's go ahead and collapse that parameter rollout. We can change some directional light parameters here. We can also go ahead and change the shadows. So we can switch from ray trace shadows to say advanced ray trace shadows. And there we go. Okay. We can also go down here and change the advanced ray traced shadow parameters, and so on and so forth. So all these parameters should look familiar to you because we dealt with these parameters in an earlier video when we talked about directional direct lighting using spotlights and omni lights, and of course the directional light to simulate a sun. The only difference between this sunlight object or this sunlight system and just placing a regular directional light is the fact that this light is tied into this compass. Now this is where the magic and the beauty of this sunlight system comes into play. With the sunlight selected, what we're going to do is go to the motion panel here, and we have ourselves a new set of options that are not available with a regular directional light. These options allow us to set the time of day, the time of the year, as well as the location in the world that this sunlight should imitate. So by default we're set to 12 o'clock, and this is in military time or international time, so it's 1200 hours. If we switch over here to 1400 hours, that's 2 p.m., 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 1800 hours is 6 p.m. or 6 in the evening, and so on and so forth. So if you're not familiar with military time or international time, this will be a good time to go ahead and get familiar with it and learn how to tell time that way. Okay, so right now it's set to 1200 hours, which is midday, which is why the sun is right on top and why we get this kind of lighting. If we change this, however, so let's switch it over to something like sunrise, so about 6 a.m. would be 0600 hours, and now we get more of a sunrise type effect. And we can always change this to say an evening, so say 1800 hours, so now we get this sort of a sunset effect, which looks pretty neat. So this allows you to change the actual time of day, which is great. We can also change the month as well, and the day and the year. We can even change the time zone, which is right now set to -8, and we can also turn on daylight savings time, which is going to go ahead and take effect there in our render. We can also go to the Get Location button and change the location. What we'll get is the geographic location window, and up here under Map, we can open up this drop-down list and we can choose. We have a lot of options here. North and South America. We can choose Europe, Australia, Asia, Africa, and so on and so forth. So this gives us a lot of options. I'll stick with North America here. And if you click on the map, you get this purple cursor that's going to try to pick up and select the closest large city, basically the closest city that you clicked on that's available in this city list. Okay, so if I click, say, somewhere here in, say, somewhere near New York over here, I might get it, I might not. It might be a little bit difficult to choose simply because it's right. Oh, there we go, I got it, New York. So there's New York City. So it'll try to pick up the city that's closest to where you're clicking. Since we here at i3D are located in Miami, I'm going to try to pick on Miami over here. And there we go, I selected it. There it is in the list, Miami, Florida. So I'll hit OK. And now the lighting's going to be adjusted to try to imitate Miami, Florida as much as possible. So this is a great lighting system that you can use to set up sunlight that looks pretty realistic. And you can set up just by changing the hours and the time of day. You can set up this lighting system however you want. So let me close that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select the light and I'm going to hit delete to get rid of it. So now we're back to the default lighting. I'll go back to the create panel, and under systems now I'll create a daylight system. And when I do that, I'll get this this dialog window that pops up, and it tells me you're creating a daylight system. We recommend that you use the logarithmic exposure control with the exterior daylight flag turned on, as this will make your daylight system look a lot more realistic and a lot better. I can choose no or I can choose yes. In this case, I'll choose yes because it'll make my renders look nicer. So then I'll go ahead and create the daylight system. I'll just do the same thing that we did with the sunlight. I'll click and drag to create the compass, and then I'll just drag one more time to place the sun. And there we go. The sun icon looks different than the sunlight icon did for the daylight. So here we go. It's really bright, but if I hit render, the colors and the lighting, the brightness is adjusted because of the logarithmic exposure control. And if I click on this icon here, I can go to the environment effects window. Shortcut for that is 8 on the keyboard, and you can see that logarithmic exposure control was activated for me, and the exterior daylight flag was turned on. So it's checked on right there. I'll close that. Okay. So we have shadows and things. Let me right click to end the creation process. Then with the light selected, I'll go to the modify panel, and here we go. We have a lot more parameters that we can adjust here with this light. Under daylight parameters, we have changes here that we can make to the sunlight and the skylight. If we go to the sunlight, we get 3 different options. We get an IES sun, mental ray sun, and standard. Under skylight, we get pretty much the same thing. An IES sky, a mental ray sky, and a regular skylight. So what's the difference between those 3? Well, the standard is just a regular standard light. This is good if you're going to be using light tracing or just regular lighting in your scene. If you're going to be using the mental ray renderer, which we're not in this tutorial, you would use the mental ray sun. The IES sun mimics a realistic sun, more realistic than the standard light because it uses an IES profile sunlight to mimic that sunlight. So I'll switch to IES sun because it looks better. And for skylight, I'll switch to an IES sky. So if you're going for realism and you're doing any type of architectural visualization, you want to stick with the IES sun and the IES skylight. So there we go. That looks great actually. Okay, let me zoom in here a little bit so I can see that better. And let me go ahead and go to my render setup here. F10 is the shortcut for that. I'll go to renderer and I'm going to turn anti-aliasing off so it renders faster. And I'm going to enable SSE just to get a little render boost there. And I'll render again. And that's a little bit faster. Of course, the quality got dropped, but in exchange for speed, so that's a good thing. Okay. I'm also going to switch from production to iterative mode and move this over here. Okay, down here we have different types of daylight parameters. For position, we can choose to manually select the position. We can use date, time, and location, or you can even use weather data files that you've downloaded off the internet. In this case, we're going to leave it to date, time, and location. If we click on the setup button, that'll automatically take us to the motion panel over here, and from here we can change the location and time just like we did before. So I can change the time to say 7 a.m. and there's a 7 a.m. sky and sunlight. Okay, I'll go back to about midday, so 12, and I can go to get location, and again I can choose. I'm going to choose Miami. Hit OK. There we go. So there's a nice Miami midday sun overhead. All right. So that's going to do it for the parameters for the location and the time. Let's go back to the modify panel and see what else we can do with this. Okay. Here's the intensity. The intensity is going to be determined by the position of the light in the sky. So you really shouldn't change the intensity here because the IES sunlight knows what it's doing and knows what parameters to choose. Shadows, we can always switch shadows to shadow maps, ray trace shadows, area shadows, or advanced ray trace shadows. I'll switch to advanced ray trace shadows because advanced ray trace shadows render a bit faster than regular ray trace shadows or shadow maps. We can also change the shadow parameters, and we have different options here, basically the same as we would with a regular directional light. And then down here we have an IES sky parameter rollout where we can actually come in here and change the IES sky parameters. So we can change, for example, the coverage from a clear day to a partly cloudy day. And if I go ahead and render that out, just makes it look more like a cloudy day, as you can see, or a really cloudy day. So now things are going to look much darker. Now it looks like there's a rainstorm coming or whatnot. I'll switch back to clear. I can also have the skylight cast shadows. Now 20 rays is a lot, so it's going to take a long time to render. So I'll drop that down to about 8, and I'll render again. So it's rendering not too slow, but I'm getting that nice skylight shadow effect going on here, which actually makes the render look better. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the cast shadows for that, and I'm going to do something a little bit different. The IES sunlight and in the daylight system with the IES sun and sky works great with radiosity. What I'm going to do is switch it back to a standard for both the skylight and the sunlight. So now we end up with something like this. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my render setup here. I'm going to go to advanced lighting and I'm going to activate the light tracer. I'm going to knock the rays to something like 64 and maybe increase my filter to 5, and my subdivide down to, I'm going to knock down to 2, and my initial sampling to maybe 8, and I'm going to put 1 bounce, and that should do it. Now I'll go back here and I'll render again, and there we go. Now we're using light tracing in conjunction with the daylight system, which creates more realistic and believable natural lighting in your scene. The best thing to do is to combine the light tracer with the daylight system when you're using a standard sunlight and a standard skylight. If you're going to be using IES sun and IES sky, you can still use light tracing, but it is recommended that you use radiosity. Radiosity, since it's based on physical parameters, you might want to stick with using IES sun and IES sky with radiosity instead of light tracing, although nothing is stopping you. As you can see, it still looks pretty good with light tracing. Okay, so that's going to cover the daylight and sunlight systems in 3ds Max. Thanks a lot for watching, and take care.